Yo, this is Derp, back with another PTR video. So I'm going to pause it real quick right here. I forgot to say what I was working on. This is a heavy point tank build for Greatsword and Warhammer. It's in heavy armor, high con, high strength, just get in there, lay down some hurt, do a huge pull, get some plague off, a lot of Rend, weaken, other debuffs, and massive staggers, and just high sustainability. So this build is going to be able to live forever on point and still be able to do pretty significant damage. It's kind of a replacement in some aspects to the Blunderbuss and Ice Gauntlet, with a lot more hard CC from the hammer and burst from the Greatsword and hammer, because the Ice Gauntlet just doesn't really do too much damage right now. So you're actually pairing it with a weapon that it's supposed to be paired with, rather than the Ice Gauntlet, which, unless you take Spike, it's just kind of a dead weapon and you're only using it to survive on perk and get your shower off. So yeah, enjoy. And right off the bat, I'll start with the stats you need. It's going to be 300 strength, 200 con. My armor, this is just PTR armor, and then I threw on Jarvis' foot wraps to get heavy. The perks you're going to want on this are Refreshing Ward. Like Biss would look like Refreshing Ward, Resilient, and Shirking Fort for the armor. I would try to get as many Refreshing Wards as possible. You don't need a lot of weapon perks for this. If you're the only Warhammer in the group, I would put Sundering Shockwave on the hammer, and you want to put Skyward Nullification on the Greatsword. You can have it on the armor or the weapon. It doesn't really make too big of a difference, but the way that it works is hitting a foe with Skyward Slash removes one of their buffs immediately, and then remaining buffs have their duration reduced by 29%. That's on the weapon. It works kind of like nullifying Oblivion. So either armor or weapons, you can put it on either, but it's going to be more effective on the weapon. And you don't really need the extra damage perk on there, just because you're a point tank. So I would prefer putting it on the sword. Now let's jump back into the build. So the abilities that you'd want to run with this point tank build, because you're going heavy, you're trying to get as much fortification as possible. Your job is to stay alive on point and basically just live there for as long as possible. And do as much debuff and CC and extra pull as possible. And this build set up like this allows you to stance really easily and go into onslaught when you need to pretty easily. So right off the bat, Path of Defiance, you take 15% less damage, you do 15% less damage, but your heavy attacks also block in a heavy attack animation. There's like this blue shield in front of you, and you can get them to block ranged attacks with arrow deflection, which is huge. So you'll block fireballs while you're heavy attacking. It's bonkers. And anybody who attacks you while you're blocking. So while you're doing a heavy, if you get hit, you're going to take less stamina damage, and you're going to inflict Rend for 10 seconds. So if you just start your heavy attack, anybody who hits you is going to get a stack of 5% Rend for 10 seconds, and it goes up to 3 stacks. That also synergizes with the first ability you take. So that's Calamity Counter. Block for 2 seconds while reducing block stamina damage taken by 90%. So you're not really taking too much stamina damage while you're doing this ability, but it puts up a huge shield in front of you that you can move with. And it also does a 100% weapon damage attack after it's done, or when you cancel it, in a 4-meter radius. So it's normal weapon damage. It's not a huge damage ability. You're not going to be murdering people with this, but it's going to give you a lot of survivability on point. And the blocking mechanic with this, including this, the air deflection, because it works with the Calamity Counter, and this, you're applying Rends to everybody who are hitting you with this. And the cool thing about this is that it's also a stagger. So if you time it right, which this whole build is built around timing and stance dancing. The whole Greatsword, unless you just go full onslaught tree, is all about stance dancing and timing. So if you're not really good at timing and you're not really good at keeping track of what stance you're in, either neutral, onslaught, or defiance, you're going to have a really rough go at it with this build, and you might actually screw your teammates over if you're not good. So definitely practice with this a lot before you do it, and make sure your combos are down really good. Otherwise, people are going to start kicking you out of war for doing too much knockback. Because if you let this ability go off after 3 blocks, it's going to do it's a small, like maybe 1 meter knockback. It's not huge. But any knockback can be bad in wars, right? If it's not, especially AoE knockbacks and not directional knockbacks. Directional knockbacks have a place in war. AoE knockbacks really don't, because you might knock somebody out of a clump. You might get somebody into a situation where you actually keep them alive because you knocked them out of damage. It just can be bad, especially if you can't control where that knockback is going. It also has grit. Another cool thing about this is that everybody who hits you is also getting a bleed. And it's a 6-second bleed for 5% per second. So if you do go over, it's like, say there's a situation where you just want to zone them out of point and you actually want to use that knockback to keep them out of point, and you're waiting for your team to catch up to you, or you're the first one in a gate, or whatever. So it can be used wisely just to let them smash on you and then get that knockback and stagger and just stack a whole shit ton of bleeds on them. Because that's a 25%, at max stacks, that's 25% weapon damage per tick per second. So that's pretty decent. And then counterattack crit chance is increased by 25%. So this has a pretty high chance to crit. It's almost guaranteed crit if you do this side right. And then in Onslaught, it gains an additional 25% chance to crit. And in Defiant Stance, it heals you for 20% of its damage. So if you're in a clump, if this thing goes off full stacks, you're going to get a pretty decent, anywhere from, it's like a Shirking heal. So it's like anywhere from probably 600 to, depending on how many people you hit, probably like 600 to, I don't know, 900 damage heal. Maybe more, depending on how much damage you're putting out. You also want to take Perfect Vigilance. If you're hit while at full health, you reduce damage taken by 20%, then gain a 20% Fortify for 3 seconds. It's just super good. If you get nuked while at full health, that first hit is going to get dropped, and you're going to gain that Fortify, which is great for sustain on point. Roaring Rupture is the mainstay ability on, in my opinion, it's the best ability on Greatsword. You stab the ground and deal send out a Shockwave with 4 meter radius that deals 120% weapon damage. You also gain 8% Fortify for 5 seconds per person that you hit with a max stack of 3. So that's up to 24% Fortify for 5 seconds. So if you're just engaging at a clump fight, here's 20% Fortify. Here's another 24% Fortify. You're almost at Fortify cap just between these two abilities, just between this passive ability and this perk. And they don't have cooldowns. I mean, the cooldown is only as long as this ability's cooldown, which, if you have full Refreshing Ward, is basically it's always up, because it's only a 19-second cooldown. And if you're getting hit a bunch on a point team, which you will be, you're going to be generating that Refreshing Ward consistently. It also has grit. You don't really care about the threat. One of the reasons why this is such a good ability is because you go down here to Purifying Roar, and you cleanse 2 debuffs after using Roaring Rupture. And this is going to be huge. Right now, it's not that big, but the second this drops, this patch drops with Brimstone, the Great Sword, it also introduces some war changes. So one of the biggest war changes that we're having is they're tripling the cooldown of cleanse pots. So you're not going to be able to pot and cleanse every 8 to 10 seconds anymore. You know, if you have refreshing toast, and if you have duplicating toast, like, you're not going to be able to just spam those cleanse pots like you have been in wars. So having other sources of cleanse is going to be really important. So I'm going to do another updated builds, like updating perks video after this one too. That'll be coming out. So what perks I think that are kind of undervalued right now that are going to become more valuable. So you might want to like buy them up off the marketplace, or you might want to invest in getting some of the trinkets so you could make them yourself when the patch hits. Because this stuff's going to go up in price. Anything that cleanses is going to be a lot more valuable, especially in war. And then another reason why this is huge is because it has anybody hit, if you're in Defiant Stance, pushes foes away 3 meters, so it's a huge knockback. Do not use that part in war. Do not use this ability if you're in defiant stance. Keep an eye on your tree. If you're in a war, knocking people back 3 meters, which is pretty big, in a 360-degree AOE, will screw up any clumps you have on point. And you're trying to get those people dead, not save their life by pushing them off a point. The only time you'd ever want to use that is if you're like trying to escape point and you don't have anybody around you, in which case you're probably dead anyway. And you probably messed up. You overextended, you got in there, or your team died and you guys got wiped. So you might as well just wipe and respawn with your team anyway. So you don't stagger your respawns. The good part about it is that if you're an onslaught tree, which if you do the combo right, you'll always be an onslaught tree when this goes off, you pull everybody 3 meters towards you. So even at the end of it, at the 4 meter mark, anybody who's just on the edge is going to get pulled. They're going to be 1 meter away from you as soon as this thing goes off. So you follow up on a gravity well with this. You follow up on a shockwave. Anybody who's trying to escape, boom. You've just clumped them right back up on you. And they're within a meter of you. If they're close to you, if they're within 3 meters, they actually touch you. Like they will be right on your body when this thing goes off. And it does 120% weapon damage to everybody within 4 meters, which isn't bad. Another huge part of this is Shockwave applies a 10% weaken for 10 seconds on hit to everybody you hit. Additionally, after a successful hit, you become uninterruptible for 5 seconds. So that's basically getting a 5-second berserk whenever you use this ability. It's insane. It's just too good not to have on your build. For stuff like 3v3s, it might not be as important, but for wars specifically and OPRs and any kind of point tank situation, this is a must-have ability. 10% weaken, especially after they nerfed the cleanse pots, is 10% less damage output from everybody on your team, or on the enemy team. So anybody attacking you that is within range to attack you is going to be giving out 10% less damage. So Faultless Defender is a good perk. We already went over that. Air's Deflection is a good perk. Unflinching Blade is a great perk. You want to avoid taking Guard Shift because you already have 2 things that are going to put you into Defiant Stance, and you only want to go into Defiant Stance after using one of these 2 abilities. You want to use... So after using this ability, you're going to go right into Calamity Counter. So it's going to give you that heal to everybody who you hit. Because you don't really need the crit because of something you pick up on Onslaught. So that's really all you need to take. There are some options. If you want to drop Air Deflection, if you're not worried about Fireballs, if you're not worried about Ice Spikes, if you're not worried about Pen Shot, or any of those other ranged attacks that you can block, you can drop this and take either Blade Honing, which increases your damage 3% for each Greatsword buff on you, which is max, which you're going to have 2 different Fortifies. You're going to have I think this just being in this counts as a buff. So there's 3 right there, and max 4. So if you have the Empower from Step and Strike, that also counts. So there's your 4 stacks. So that's 12% Empower, which is great. But it's actually a base damage increase, so it doesn't go against your cap. This one's also good. After gaining Defiance Stance, the next damage within 5 seconds, taken within 5 seconds, is reduced by 25%. Or Cleansing Chain, the final attack of your Greatsword Chain reduces duration of debuffs on you by 10%. So another cleanse. That's really good, but it's really good in theory. But you're probably not going to be doing your light attack chain very often in this build because you're going to want to be using heavy attacks via aggressive shift to get back into Onslaught to make sure your Roaring Rupture goes off. There's only 2 ways to get into Onslaught stance with this build. It's by using this ability, Skyward Slash, or you doing a heavy to get you into your Onslaught stance before pulling everybody in. So your Onslaught stance, you want to take Heavy Blade because you're going to be doing a lot of heavies with your aggressive shift. The other option is Giant Slayer, increase base attack damage by 20% when attacking foes above 90% health. It's great for the initial encounter, not useful for anything else. So I just take Heavy Blade because it's just straight up 15% armor pen. This is also up to you. I take the after gaining onslaught stance, your next attack within 5 seconds has a 100% crit chance, because then you can make this have a 100% crit chance. So you're going to be doing 120% times 1.25 to everybody because it's going to be guaranteed crit. So yeah, it's just a way to ensure crit. Aggressive Shift gets you into your stance. You can take Swift Onslaught, gain a 20% haste for 5 seconds after using any Onslaught tree ability. You're sitting on point. Like, who cares about haste? This is only going to be a situational perk. The ability from Onslaught you want is Skyward Slash. It's a huge ability. It's another one of my favorites from Greatsword. Skyward Slash. You swing up in a brutal arc, staggering your target, dealing 80% weapon damage, and applying 2 stacks of 5% rend for 10 seconds. Max 3 stacks. So if you're already in Onslaught stance, so say you do a heavy before you do this, you're going to get an additional rend. So that's 15% rend for 3 seconds, or for 10 seconds. That's a pretty decent rend. It's going to eat away at their fortification. So if you can get into the habit of heavy attacking before doing this, you can if you have time. If you don't, you know, a 5% rend or 10% rend is still good. Add a follow-up attack that deals 140% weapon, so that brings the total damage of this 2-part attack up to 220, which is, and it's a full AoE. The first attack is like 100, is almost a 360-degree swing. I think it's like probably closer to like 300-degree arc of attack. And then Skyward Slash is a follow-up attack that deals 140% weapon damage. If you use so you have to light attack or press the ability again to set it off while you're up in the air. And the first attack applies Disease, which reduces healing by 20%. So it's a 20% disease, it's a 10 to 15% rend, and it does a massive amount of damage. And it also makes the follow-up attack strike all foes within 3 meters. Step and Strike is also huge, because you're going to be dodging, you're going to be getting your Shirking Fort up, so every time you dodge, gain a 10% in power for the next 3 hits within 10 seconds. And attacks empowered by this effect also restore 10 stamina. So you're not going to be running out of stamina on point. It's just kind of a must-have. Now, if you're only relying on your ability chain to get you in and out of Defiance stance, and you don't really care about getting that additional rend, you can drop Aggressive Shift and pick up Crush the Weak or Critical Comeback. In my opinion, Critical Comeback is kind of a trap, because you become energized, which is a buff. So it's a 5-second buff that would count towards this. So if you're relying on the damage increase from this, which will completely negate your damage reduction, if you take this, you might want to consider dropping Aggressive Shift and going into Critical Comeback, because that's another buff for you to max out your stacks and get that 12% base damage increase. So it's not even an empower, it just reduces, so you're only going to be missing 3, because it makes you energized by landing a critical hit, which counts as a buff, and you regain 5 stamina and 5% base health for 5 seconds, or a 10-second cooldown. So 5% base health isn't that great, because I don't think it accounts for food buffs and other sources of health boost. So I don't think it's going to count your health on your ring or your amulet, and I don't think it's going to account for any. It might account for con from a food buff, but I'm not sure if it does, because it says specifically base health for 5 seconds. So it's a 25% base health heal over 5 seconds, but it's a heal over time. And if you get a Nullifying Oblivion on you, it's gone. You know, that's one of the reasons why I think that this is kind of a trap too, because there's so many Nullifying Oblivions going down all the time that all of these buffs that you're getting are probably going to be stripped away 25 to 50% of the war anyway. So, and you can only rely on getting these buffs back up by, you know, getting back up to full health, or relying on this one to reduce the damage. I like to take more passive stuff that you don't have to rely on things to be up exactly the way you need them to get the full benefit. So I would say keeping this and skipping this and taking Crush the Weak is going to be the way to go. Because critical hit chance, you can apply these debuffs. You're going to be applying a lot of debuffs. then anybody you hit, you're going to have 10% crit chance on attacking them. And that accounts for abilities too. So it's going to just increase your overall damage by a pretty significant margin. Now let's look into the Warhammer. Basically your standard Warhammer build. You can drop Path of Destiny and pick up Armor Breaker since you're going to be playing so close. I like Path of Destiny because if I'm off of point, or if I have to back up off of point and we're getting pushed out, I could pod into point and stagger everybody and get a little bit of health back because of Prevailing Spirit. And it's going to stagger and it reduces cooldowns by 5%. So I do Shockwave is must have. So I do first you do Outnumbered, increase base damage absorption by 10% if you're surrounded by 2 or more enemies within 3 meters. Amazing. Shockwave, big stun, big weaken. And if you have Sundering Shockwave, it's also a Rend. And it's a 4-meter radius. So it's a pretty big AoE CC. Everybody who plays Warhammer is already used to this. Concussive Impact, deal 15% increased damage against targets affected by Warhammer debuffs. That's everybody you're hitting while your hammer's out. This is kind of not good for a point tank. I skipped these two. Reduce damage 10% while sprinting. You're not going to be sprinting on point. Reduce Warhammer cooldowns by 7% when using light attacks against a target with active debuff. I never use Warhammer light attacks. I always go for Warhammer heavies. I don't block with my Warhammer, so this doesn't matter. And you have another weapon that's better at blocking, so I take it. Concussive Impact, 15% more damage. Great. Prevailing Spirit, 35% damage from abilities that use Crowd Crusher abilities. So that's 35% healing from Shockwave, 35% healing from Path of Destiny. And if you launch this into the middle of a huge clump, you're going to get a lot of health back. Resurgent is also really good. After 2 light attacks with the Warhammer, debuff durations on your player are reduced by 25%. So I usually don't do light attacks, but you need to do... You could drop this, but you need to pick up one perk from here. So you could either do Acceleration and get your cooldowns back faster, or after 2 light attacks, you reduce your debuffs on your player by 25%. And then you take Aftershock, which is whenever a target is affected by a crowd control effect, they are slowed by 20% for 4 seconds. Massive. Slows are going to be huge. And then I take Wrecking Ball. Some people are giving it Path and taking this. Armor Breaker. Some people are giving up Wrecking Ball and taking Armor Breaker. I would say keep Wrecking Ball and Shockwave as must-haves for on-point play. To get here, you take Hammer Time. Gain in power on heavy attacks, increasing damage by 20% for 4 seconds. I only do Hammer Heavies. Increase armor penetration by 10% for all Warhammer basic attacks. That includes heavies. So that's basically just 10% more damage on all attacks. Hardened Steel adds grit to Warhammer heavies. Also grants 12% damage reduction while grit is active. So that's just a 12% damage reduction. Doesn't count against Fortify cap. Increase heavy attack damage by 15% against targets under 30% health. That that's universal. So it's a good execute for hammer heavies. Or just launching pod through a clump that with really, if you're not in a clump and you want to try to help get some damage off, some last minute damage, send your pod through there, your Path of Destiny through there, and there you're doing more damage to anybody below 30%. Good perk. Another option is exhaustive attacks. All Warhammer abilities apply exhaust, slowing target stamina regen by 20% for 5 seconds. So it really depends. Do you want extra damage or do you want to apply exhaust? That's up to you. But you need one of these 2 perks for this row to get down to Wrecking Ball. A lot of people take the exhaust over it because your job as a point tank isn't to do damage. So I can see that. That's like a 50-50 split in my opinion. And with stamina management being, especially after this patch, when this patch drops, stamina management is going to be huge. It already is becoming a more stamina management game. So you might want to drop Hardened Steel and forego that damage to pick up the 20% exhaust from all of your abilities. And then Wrecking Ball is just good. It's a knockdown. It deals decent damage. It has grit. On successful hit, you gain Fortify, granting 20% damage resistance for 7 seconds. You're going to need that. And then Breathing Room expands the range of Wrecking Ball to a 1.5 meter radius. That's not a huge expansion, but it's better than just being a focused attack. So if you did want to take the exhaust, what I would do is and then power through tough pain, or power through pain, deal 35% damage after taking for 1 second after taking an attack. So that would be, if you hit, anytime you're hit, there's no cooldown on this. So you're just going to have 35% damage for basically all the time, extra damage. Boom. You got rid of that. You went in there. We don't really need quick recovery. You can take it, but if you're giving something up, you'd have to be giving up either 20% in power for a hammer heavy or armor pen on all Warhammer. So I would say you'd give up this for this if you wanted to get the heavy attacks reduce the cooldown, but I don't think it's worth it because you have so much refreshing ward on anyway. And after the patch, I think this actually is the way to go. Exhaustive attacks, now that I think about it, I think that exhaustive attacks is going to be better than hardened steel. And you need one of the two just to get here. So I would probably take this because your job isn't to do a shit ton of damage. And you're already going to have grit. So the extra 12% damage on that isn't going to be too huge. And you don't want to give up 35% extra damage for it. You don't want to give up the 15% damage against extra health for a 12% damage. Doesn't make sense. Yeah. That's about it. I'll show you what the combo looks like. You're going to want to open with your Skyward Slash, go immediately into the pull. That's going to pull everybody in, and then once they start attacking you, you can block if you're under pressure. And then if you're alone, if you overextended, you could use the knockback, but I try to let it out early. And then you want a heavy attack, which is going to bring you back into your onslaught stance, and then repeat the combo. So you're going to want to follow up a grab, Shockwave stun everybody, Skyward Slash, pull everybody back in, back up, Wrecking Ball, block if you need to, hammer heavy, pod. That's really it. And then you go into your Great Axe heavies, because your Great Axe heavies, if you do the whole chain, is the second and third are basically 360-degree swings. And if you look at the arc of the Skyward Slash, it's a basically 360-degree arc to one side. It follows up mostly. It doesn't hit people directly behind you. So there's a cone of maybe like 40 degrees behind you that it's not really hitting. And then you have the second attack, which is 360-degree AoE. If you look at the Q, or the big block ability, so that is a directional like 180-degree block, basically, and it does a full 360-degree arc on the counterattack. But yeah, that's about it. You have a nice sustain, a lot of pulls, a lot of debuffs, and if you're in the standard Bruiser group, the ability to just repeatedly pull people and do shockwaves with this build is going to be huge. You're going to get a lot of value and provide a lot of debuff, a lot of positioning, like against your team, the enemy team. You're going to remove them from the position they want to be in because you're going to pull everybody into you, and you're going to become that focus of attention, which is going to allow the other two Bruisers in your team to follow up with additional gravity wells, additional shockwaves, wrecking balls, path of destinies, everything. The only thing you have to really worry about is managing your stances. So you always want to either heavy attack or Skyward Slash before your Rupture. That's the most important thing, is stance dancing. And then again, if you heavy attack while you're in defensive stance, you will end up going back into onslaught and you get that block. So if you don't need to use the block, Skyward Slash into Rupture, get that pull off. You can Shockwave before or after, switch back and use your Greatsword to do heavies. Because that's going to put you into a neutral stance, switching out of the weapon. So say I'm in defensive stance with this, and then I immediately switch to hammer and then switch back to Greatsword, I'm in neutral stance now. And you can tell based on what direction you're holding your sword. So neutral stance is you're holding your sword vertically. Offensive stance, you're holding it back. Defensive stance, you're holding it forward. That's how you tell. But, yep. That's about it. Try to stack them Shirking Forts, and they're the Resilient and Refreshing Ward on your armor and accessories. You can get up to 8 Refreshing Wards on your full kit. And if you can, I would do it. It's massive. Get those purifies as well, those cleanses on your amulets and earrings and all that. It's all going to be super important after this patch. I hope you have a wonderful day or a good night, whatever it is for you. Remember to smash that like and subscribe button. I need some more chimichangas.